This video delves into a subject often surrounded by controversy and misunderstanding, which is the authenticity of narrations in Islam, with a specific focus on the collection known as Sahih Bukhari. This topic challenges long-standing assumptions and requires a comprehensive and analytical approach to uncover the truth. In this series, we delve into the intriguing world of Sahih Bukhari and its compilation, exploring key aspects that have shaped its legacy as one of the most revered collections of hadith in Islam. We begin with the 5 conditions of Sahih Hadith, briefly examining the rigorous criteria that define the authenticity of a narration and why these standards are essential for preserving the integrity of Islamic teachings. Next, we uncover the critical background of Sahih Bukhari, shedding light on the life of Imam Bukhari and his meticulous efforts in compiling narrations, as well as the historical context of his work. The third section, Who Compiled the Narrations, challenges conventional narratives by addressing whether the Sahih Bukhari we know today was directly authored by Imam Bukhari or later compiled by his students and scholars. In Chronology of Gaps, we analyze the historical gaps in the chain of narrations, raising questions about their continuity and authenticity. Finally, Solving the Puzzle investigates how scholars and commentators throughout history have attempted to bridge these gaps and establish a cohesive narrative for this foundational text. Join us as we explore these fascinating topics with a critical and thought-provoking lens. The challenges of preserving knowledge in early Islamic history, such as reliance on oral transmission, the lack of standardized texts, and the slow adoption of printing, created a fertile ground for the spread of false attributions to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Recognizing the potential dangers to Islamic teachings and law, scholars developed rigorous criteria to determine the authenticity of narrations. This led to the establishment of the 5 universally accepted conditions for classifying a hadith as sahih or authentic. Let's walk through this together. For a hadith to be classified as sahih or authentic, it must satisfy 5 key conditions, all of which focus on the reliability of the narrators and the integrity of the transmission. The first condition is a continuous chain of narration, ensuring that every narrator in the chain directly received the narration from their predecessor without any gaps. Scholars assess the continuity of a narration by ensuring that both the narrator and their predecessor lived during the same period, making the transmission possible. Additionally, there must be reasonable evidence or documentation suggesting that the narrators were in the same geographical location or had the opportunity to meet. Furthermore, direct attribution is essential, meaning that the narration must explicitly state transmission through phrases such as "I heard from" or "so and so told me," which indicate first-hand reporting. However, if any link in the chain is unverifiable or broken, i.e., one narrator did not meet or could not have reasonably interacted with their predecessor, the narration is typically classified as weak unless further evidence strengthens it. The second condition, integrity and uprightness of narrators, requires that all narrators be morally upright and trustworthy. This means that every narrator in the chain must be a person of high moral character, honesty, and religious commitment. A narrator must be known for their truthfulness, trustworthiness, and adherence to Islamic teachings, avoiding major sins and not persistently engaging in minor sins. If a narrator was found to be dishonest or careless, the narration they transmitted would be classified as weak. Therefore, for a narration to be considered authentic, every individual in its transmission chain must possess unquestionable integrity. The third condition emphasizes the importance of precise memory or reliable written records to prevent errors. This means that every narrator in the chain must have a strong memory and precise retention skills, ensuring that the hadith was transmitted exactly as they received it, without alteration, omission, or distortion. Narrators must be able to recall the hadith with consistent wording or meaning and must not contradict other reliable narrators. There are two types of precision in narration that ensure the accuracy of a hadith. The first is memory precision, which requires the narrator to have an exceptional ability to memorize and recall the hadith accurately. The second is written precision, which applies to narrators who transmit hadith from written sources, ensuring that their manuscripts are meticulously preserved, free from errors, and not subject to unauthorized modifications. Both forms of precision are crucial in maintaining the authenticity and reliability of a hadith. If a narrator is found to have weak memory, inconsistencies in their narrations, or reliance on inaccurate written records, the hadith may be classified as weak. The fourth condition is that a hadith must not contradict more authentic or widely accepted narrations from other reliable sources, including stronger hadiths, well-established historical facts, or the Quran. A hadith is classified anomalous or irregular if a reliable narrator transmits something that contradicts stronger evidence or the collective reports of more trustworthy narrators and will be considered as weak. Lastly, the absence of hidden defects is crucial, as any subtle flaw, like a narrator falsely claiming to have met their teacher or discrepancies in wording, renders the hadith unreliable. Together, these conditions ensure the authenticity and accuracy of hadiths used as a foundation for Islamic teachings. For a narration or collection of narrations to be classified as sahih or authentic, it must meet these 5 essential conditions. First, an unbroken chain of transmission. Second, integrity and uprightness of narrators. Third, accuracy and precision in narration. Fourth, absence of contradiction. And fifth, absence of hidden defects. These conditions ensure that the hadith has been reliably preserved, transmitted, and authenticated by scholars over generations. However, for today's discussion, the first condition, which pertains to the continuity of the transmission chain, and the second condition, which focuses on the moral integrity and reliability of narrators, are of particular importance as we critically examine the compilation and preservation of Sahih Bukhari. Imam Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, born on July 20th, 810 CE in Bukhara, present-day Uzbekistan, is one of the most renowned figures in Islamic history, best known for compiling Sahih al-Bukhari, widely regarded as the most authentic collection of hadith in Sunni Islam. Of Persian descent, Imam Bukhari's legacy reflects the significant contributions of Persian scholars to early Islamic intellectual traditions. He dedicated over 16 years of his life to compiling Sahih al-Bukhari, meticulously verifying hadiths through rigorous criteria to ensure their authenticity. His work set unparalleled standards for hadith scholarship. During his lifetime, he traveled extensively across the Islamic world, including regions such as Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and the Hijaz, and studied under more than 1,000 scholars. His compilation, formally titled The Concise Authentic Collection of the Matters, Traditions, and Life of the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, is a cornerstone of Islamic thought. However, much of what is known about Imam Bukhari's life comes from biographies authored by later scholars, which often lack verifiable sources and cannot be considered entirely authentic. These accounts are frequently shaped by religious reverence, dreams, and cultural storytelling rather than concrete historical evidence. Historical records also indicate that Imam Bukhari engaged in trade, including the buying and selling of slaves, a socially accepted practice during his era, and used to have a female slave under his authority. The trade provided the financial means for his extensive travels and scholarly endeavors. Imam Bukhari passed away on September 1st, 870 CE near Samarkand, present-day Uzbekistan. While it is claimed that Imam Bukhari's students transcribed as many as 90,000 copies of his Sahih Bukhari collection, yet scholars also agree that it was not preserved in a single unified form. Let us now systematically explore the transmission process and evaluate whether the Sahih Bukhari available today meets the 5 conditions of authenticity. The timeline of Sahih Bukhari's transmission reveals substantial historical gaps that bring its textual integrity into question. While the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away in 10 AH, Imam Bukhari completed his compilation of hadiths in 256 AH, marking a significant gap of 246 years. In this video, however, our focus is not on this initial gap, but on examining the transmission and authenticity of Sahih Bukhari from Imam Bukhari's time to the present. The compilation of Sahih Bukhari as it exists today was finalized in 852 after Hijrah, nearly 596 years after Bukhari's death in 256. This task was undertaken during the rule of the Sultan of Malacca by the renowned hadith scholar Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, born in 773 and passing away in 852, authored approximately 150 works, the most influential being Fath al-Bari, his commentary on Sahih Bukhari, which took him 25 years to complete. Now this visual timeline shows Bukhari from Imam Bukhari to Ibn Hajar. On the left, we have Imam Bukhari, who passed away in 256, and on the right is Ibn Hajar, who died in 852. The timeline reveals an extraordinary gap of approximately 596 years between these two figures. The significant gap between Imam Bukhari and Ibn Hajar raises an essential question. Can the authenticity of Sahih Bukhari's narrations be established based on the 5 conditions of hadith verification? Scholars bridge this gap through layered commentaries and reliance on fragmented narrations, a wall strategy often referred to as the ulama shuffle. Let's delve deeper into how this timeline was pieced together. To address the 596-year gap, scholars introduce a key figure, Al-Firabri, a student of Imam Bukhari who passed away in 320. The current version of Sahih Bukhari is said to rely primarily on narrations transmitted by Al-Firabri. However, even with Al-Firabri's inclusion in the timeline, a substantial gap of 532 years remains. This extended timeline highlights the challenges of preserving and verifying the integrity of the original work over such a long period. More on Al-Firabri will be discussed later in the video. To further reduce the 532-year gap, scholars introduced another key figure, Al-Khushaymani, a disciple of Bukhari's student who lived approximately 133 years after Bukhari's death. He is credited with a commentary on Sahih Bukhari. However, even his work was never consolidated into a single authoritative volume. This approach effectively means that Ibn Hajar's compilation is not a direct transmission of Bukhari's original work, but rather a commentary on an already fragmented commentary. While this strategy attempts to bridge the gap, it still leaves a substantial 463-year gap between Al-Khushaymani and Ibn Hajar unaccounted for. Let us review the key takeaways and additional points. Firstly, historical records indicate that Imam Bukhari's students transcribed over 90,000 copies of his Sahih book during his gatherings. However, none of these original manuscripts are available for verification today. This raises a critical question. How could such a vast body of work simply vanish, or did it ever exist in the first place? Secondly, the collection of Sahih Bukhari as it exists today was finalized in 852, nearly 596 years after Bukhari's death in 256, making its transmission a subject of scrutiny. Thirdly, scholars acknowledge that Sahih Bukhari was never preserved in a single unified form. The version available today is a product of multiple interpretations, commentaries, and recollections over centuries, rather than a preserved work from the time of Bukhari himself. Fourthly, Islamic scholars often emphasize that over 70 commentaries have been written on Sahih Bukhari, presenting this as evidence of its scholarly robustness and depth. Fifthly, the number 70 itself is staggering, and each of these commentaries is based on different sources, which only adds to the complexity. These so-called variant readings introduce multiple layers of gaps, some spanning 400, 500, or even 300 years. This suggests that the preservation of hadith in Ahlus Sunnah is built on assumptions and varying narrations rather than a single verified source. Lastly, despite these historical inconsistencies, and rather strangely, over 6 centuries later, this collection of scattered narrations came to be regarded as the most authoritative text after the Quran. A fundamental question arises: how did Ibn Hajar compile a comprehensive commentary on a text that lacked a standardized version? Given that printing presses, copier machines, and computers did not exist at the time, the reconstruction of Sahih Bukhari relied on fragmented transmissions. Ultimately, the Sahih Bukhari available in contemporary bookstores is more accurately attributed to Ibn Hajar than to Imam Bukhari himself. To critically assess how Sahih Bukhari was transmitted from Imam Bukhari to Ibn Hajar, we must examine the 5 historically documented transmission chains. Scholars have identified 5 distinct pathways through which Bukhari's collection supposedly reached Ibn Hajar. However, despite claims that 90,000 students transcribed copies of Sahih Bukhari directly from Imam Bukhari, the versions available today ultimately trace back through only 5 students: Maqil, Shakir, Bazdawi, Mahamili, and Firabri. Each of these chains presents the same glaring issue: significant years of gap between Imam Bukhari and Ibn Hajar. This raises a fundamental question: do these transmission chains meet the 5 conditions of Sahih Hadith? To determine this, we will analyze each chain individually, evaluating whether the integrity of the narrations has been maintained, or if these gaps introduce uncertainty in the authenticity of the text we have today. The path from Imam Bukhari to Ibn Hajar, spanning over 596 years, presents us with 5 claimed chains of transmission: Firabri, Maqil, Shakir, Bazdawi, and Mahamili. However, none of these chains meets the basic conditions of Sahih Hadith due to unknown narrators, time gaps, or unreliable transmitters. This raises a fundamental question: how did Ibn Hajar manage to compile his comprehensive commentary on Sahih Bukhari? The answer is surprisingly simple. Ibn Hajar essentially reconstructed what he believed to be Sahih Bukhari from various fragmented sources, manuscripts, and incomplete transmissions available to him. It's like trying to recreate your grandmother's famous recipe 500 years after she lived, with only scattered incomplete notes from different family members who claim they got it from her. You might end up with something that everyone accepts as grandmother's recipe, but can you really be certain it's exactly what she made? Let us now examine each chain in detail to understand why none of them meets the stringent criteria of hadith authentication. We'll analyze how each transmission route fails to establish an unbroken, reliable connection between Imam Bukhari and Ibn Hajar. Before we begin evaluating the first chain of transmission from Firabri, a student of Imam Bukhari, to Ibn Hajar, it is essential to remember two critical conditions of Sahih Hadith. First, there must be an unbroken chain of transmission, meaning that each narrator must have directly received the narration from their predecessor without any gaps. Second, the narrator must be trustworthy and reliable, meaning they should not be known for falsehood or be an obscure figure, unknown to scholars of their time. Importantly, any testimony regarding a narrator's reliability must come from scholars who lived during their lifetime. Later attributions carry no weight. Additionally, a narrator's piety or devotion to worship does not automatically validate their memory or accuracy in transmitting prophetic traditions. With these key principles in mind, let us begin by critically analyzing the first transmission chain from Firabri, a student of Imam Bukhari, to Ibn Hajar to determine whether it meets the stringent criteria of authenticity. Among the various chains of transmission for Sahih Bukhari, the chain through Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Firabri, who died in 320, stands as the most widely accepted and celebrated version in contemporary Islamic scholarship. This chain, which spans approximately 532 years from Firabri to Ibn Hajar, represents what most Muslims today consider the most authentic transmission of Bukhari's work. However, just as we examined other chains, this prominent path of transmission deserves careful historical scrutiny. A curious aspect of the Firabri transmission is its near-complete dominance of Bukhari's work. Despite historical records indicating that Imam Bukhari taught his collection to numerous students and 90,000 copied the collection, the Firabri version has emerged as almost the sole surviving transmission. The absence of other major transmitters like Ibrahim ibn Maqil and Hamad ibn Shakir raises important questions about the fate of competing versions, whether they were lost, suppressed, or deemed unreliable. This monopoly creates a fundamental question. Does what we have today truly represent Bukhari's original compilation, or is it specifically Firabri's version of it? Another concern is that the Firabri transmission isn't uniform. Multiple versions exist through different students of Firabri, including the Al-Nasafi, Al-Kushmayhani, and Al-Sarakhsi versions. These variations, combined with suggestions that Bukhari's original compilation contained additional hadiths not found in current versions, raise questions about textual fidelity. This becomes particularly significant given historical records indicating that Bukhari continuously edited and revised his collection, and nothing can be verified. While some modern critics question the reliability of this transmission, many classical and contemporary scholars have affirmed his trustworthiness. Among them, Al-Hafiz ibn Adi, a renowned hadith scholar, narrated directly from Al-Firabri and did not include him among weak narrators in his work Al-Kamil fi Du'afa al-Rijal, implying his acceptance of Al-Firabri's reliability. Similarly, Imam Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, in his work Al-Muhalla bi al-Athar, utilized narrations transmitted by Al-Firabri, following his principle of citing only authentic reports from trustworthy narrators. Furthermore, Al-Hafiz al-Dahabi referred to Al-Firabri in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala as the hadith scholar, the trustworthy, the learned. Other scholars such as Imam Abu Bakr al-Samani and Imam Abu Walid al-Baji also attested to his reliability, describing him as trustworthy and well-known. These affirmations indicate that Al-Firabri was widely considered a credible transmitter by prominent hadith scholars, and his version of Sahih al-Bukhari has been generally accepted in Islamic scholarship. The science of hadith authentication fundamentally requires verification from scholars who lived in the same time period. Let us examine whether the scholars who praised Al-Firabri were from his lifetime or not. Al-Firabri passed away in 320, and the earliest known scholar to endorse him was Al-Hafiz ibn Adi, who died in 365, 45 years later. This raises the question of whether Ibn Adi's praise was based on first-hand knowledge or merely on later reports. There is no record of him meeting or studying under Al-Firabri directly. Furthermore, Ibn Adi's famous work, Al-Kamil fi Du'afa al-Rijal, was written much later in his career, meaning his assessment of Al-Firabri would have been based on second-hand reports rather than direct verification. Simply being alive at the same time does not equate to having personal knowledge of someone's transmission accuracy. Therefore, Ibn Adi's praise of Al-Firabri does not serve as strong evidence of his reliability, as it relies on later narrators rather than direct evaluation. Similarly, Imam Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, who died in 456, also praised Al-Firabri, but his endorsement suffers from the same issue. Since Al-Firabri passed away in 320, Ibn Hazm's praise came more than a century later, making it impossible for him to have assessed Al-Firabri firsthand. Furthermore, Al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi, who died in 748, referred to Al-Firabri as the Hadith scholar. However, his praise came more than 400 years after Al-Firabri's death, making it entirely dependent on inherited scholarly tradition rather than first-hand assessment. Similarly, Imam Abu Bakr al-Sam'ani, who died in 510, and Imam Abu Walid al-Baji, who died in 474, praised Al-Firabri, yet their statements were made 190 and 154 years after his death, respectively. Given these significant time gaps, it is evident that their endorsements were not based on personal verification, but rather on later reports. Regardless of how many prominent scholars praised Al-Firabri after his lifetime, relying on inherited tradition rather than first-hand knowledge, or how highly regarded they were, such posthumous authentication cannot establish him as a reliable transmitter. As a result, Al-Firabri remains an unknown in the chain, rendering the entire transmission null and void. Now, let us evaluate the alternative chain of transmission from Ibrahim bin Maqil al-Nasafi. This chain branches into two distinct subchains, both of which require careful examination. The first chain follows. Bukhari narrated to Ibrahim bin Maqil al-Nasafi, who then narrated to Khalaf bin Muhammad al-Khayyam, who later transmitted it to Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi. The second chain follows. Bukhari narrated to Ibrahim bin Maqil al-Nasafi, who passed it to Abu al-Fadl Saleh bin Muhammad bin Shadan al-Asbahani, who then transmitted it to Abu Ali al-Jayani. We will now analyze both chains critically to assess their reliability. In this first chain, Khalaf ibn Muhammad has been criticized by scholars like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who labeled him as severely weak and unreliable in hadith transmission. Additionally, accusations of hadith fabrication have been directed at him by scholars such as Ibn al-Jawzi. This raises serious doubts about the reliability of this transmission chain, as it is based on a narrator whose integrity and authenticity have been highly contested. Now let us evaluate the second subchain from Maqil. Abu Ali al-Jayani narrated another chain from Maqil, saying, "It has been narrated to us that Saleh narrated from Ibrahim bin Maqil that al-Bukhari permitted him to narrate the Book of Ahikam from his Jami' Sahih al-Bukhari from beginning to end." Here al-Jayani making a claim that Bukhari himself permitted Saleh to narrate Sahih Bukhari. Therefore, let us evaluate Saleh and then al-Jayani. The claim of transmission through Ibrahim bin Maqil, as narrated by Abu Ali al-Jayani, lacks proper verification. While it is recorded in Taqid al-Muhmal that Imam Bukhari himself permitted this narration, the reliability of this claim remains unproven. Saleh is not known among scholars of his time and therefore considered as unknown. Now, Ibn Asakir in Tarikh Dimashq referenced Ibn Yunus al-Misri as the one who authenticated Salih bin Muhammad. However, Ibn Yunus himself remained virtually unknown for 150 years after his death and was only declared trustworthy 200 years later by Al-Samani in Al-Ansab. Since Ibn Yunus lacks credibility, his authentication of Salih bin Muhammad holds no weight, leaving Salih's reliability highly questionable. Now let us see again what Al-Jayani mentioned about Salih. Abu Ali Al-Jayani narrated another chain from Maqil, saying, "It has been narrated to us that Salih narrated from Ibrahim bin Maqil that Al-Bukhari permitted him to narrate the book of Ahikam from his Jami Sahih Al-Bukhari from beginning to end in Taqid Al-Muhmal." Here, Al-Jayani making a claim that Bukhari himself permitted Salih to narrate Sahih Bukhari. This narration suffers from a disconnection in the chain. Let us see the recorded dates. Al-Jayani was born in 427, while Salih died around 350, creating a gap of at least 77 years. This missing link weakens the reliability of the transmission. It also explains why Al-Jayani used the ambiguous term, "it has been narrated to us," a common indicator of an unverified and unreliable chain of narration. The chain of narration from Imam Bukhari to Ibn Hajar via Ibrahim bin Maqil al-Nasafi is weak and unsubstantiated. The presence of unreliable narrators, unknown transmitters, and a disconnected chain renders this transmission invalid, according to the first condition of Sahih Hadith, continuity of transmission without gaps. Therefore, this chain fails the authenticity test and cannot be used as a reliable source for attributing Sahih Bukhari directly to Imam Bukhari. There are two claimed transmission routes of Sahih Bukhari through Hamad bin Shakir al-Nasafi. The historical records tell us that Hamad bin Shakir al-Nasafi received the collection of Sahih directly from Imam Bukhari himself. However, there's an interesting detail here. We don't actually know exactly when he studied under Imam Bukhari. This itself violates the very first condition, which requires clear evidence that the narrators received the narrations directly from their predecessors. While later historians considered his transmission reliable, this gap in our historical knowledge is worth noting. For the first transmission, Ibn Nuqta states that Ja'far bin Muhammad bin Mu'taz al-Mustaghwiri mentioned in his book Tarikh Nasaf that Hamad bin Shakir narrated Sahih Bukhari from Muhammad bin Ismail al-Bukhari. He is reliable and trustworthy. I received the complete narration of Sahih from Bakar bin Muhammad bin Ja'far and Abu Ahmad Qadi, who transmitted it from Hamad bin Shakir. It's worth noting that Al-Mustaghfiri is just reporting this information in his book Tarikh Nasaf, but he didn't hear it directly from Hamad bin Shakir himself. He's documenting what these two narrators, Bakar and Abu Ahmad, claimed about their learning from Hamad bin Shakir. This book, Tarikh Nasaf, no longer exists today. Also, no hadith through Al-Mustaghfiri's chain appears in current versions of Sahih Bukhari. Now, looking at this narration through Hamad bin Shakir, we find that two people reportedly received this knowledge from Hamad bin Shakir. These were Bakar bin Muhammad bin Ja'far and Abu Ahmad Qadi. Here's where things get interesting. While we know that Bakar bin Muhammad was known for reciting the Quran day and night, and for his strong stance against heretics, these qualities, though admirable, don't necessarily make someone reliable in hadith transmission. In fact, both he and Abu Ahmad Qadi remain largely unknown figures in terms of hadith transmission reliability. Since both narrators remain unknown, Al-Mustaghfiri's transmission from Hamad bin Shakir is invalid and unreliable. Furthermore, Tarikh Nasaf, the very source that Al-Mustaghfiri relied on, no longer exists. Thus, this entire transmission chain is rendered weak and baseless. Now here's the second chain of transmission from Hamad bin Shakir. An examination of this transmission chain reveals critical reliability issues with three key narrators whose roles warrant careful scrutiny. In examining the unreliable narrators in this chain, Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Rumay stands out as particularly problematic. Ibn Tahir al-Qaisarani documented that Rumay was connected to the Zaydi sect, a subdivision of Shia Islam, raising initial concerns about potential sectarian influence in his transmissions. While Al-Hakim, who authored Al-Mustadrak, offered extensive praise for Rumay, this endorsement itself is questionable since Al-Hakim faced significant criticism for his own biases. More importantly, prominent scholars raised serious doubts about Rumay's reliability. Abu Zara al-Kishi suggested issues with Rumay's truthfulness as recorded in Tariq Baghdad, while Abu Nuaym went further by explicitly labeling him as weak in the same source. While Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi did present some positive evaluations from Abu al-Fath and Abu Sa'id al-Idrisi, these endorsements were insufficient to counterbalance the substantial criticisms. Ultimately, al-Dahabi's decision to include him among the weak narrators in Al-Mughni and dismiss his authentication as unreliable serves as a decisive scholarly judgment on his credibility. Regarding Al-Hakim Abu Abdullah, the author of Al-Mustadrak, significant concerns exist about his reliability as a transmitter. Al-Dahabi records a particularly telling assessment from Abu Ismail al-Harawi, who presented a complex evaluation. While acknowledging Al-Hakim's trustworthiness in hadith transmission, he simultaneously identified him as a malicious Rafidi, Shiite extremist, as documented in Siyar Alam al-Nubala. This mixed reputation was further reinforced by additional scholarly criticisms, collectively casting doubt on his reliability as a transmitter in the chain. The combination of sectarian bias with scholarly criticism creates a significant challenge in accepting his role in the transmission chain without reservation. Ibn Abi Rabi bin Abi Tahir bin Qudama represents a significant weak link in the transmission chain due to his classification as Majhul al-Hal, of unknown status. This designation is particularly problematic in hadith scholarship, as it indicates that no recognized scholars of the time verified or authenticated his reliability as a transmitter. Without any historical validation of his character or competence in transmitting religious texts, his presence in the chain creates a fundamental gap in establishing the authenticity of transmissions that passed through him. This investigation establishes that the transmission of Sahih Bukhari through Hamad bin Shagir is weak and unverifiable. Furthermore, Sahih Bukhari does not exist in its published form today with an unbroken chain through Hamad bin Shagir. The only narration attributed to Hamad bin Shagir in the printed version of Sahih Bukhari is a single report, which is, "O Abdullah bin Amr, what will become of you when you are surrounded by wicked and corrupt people?" Thus, the claim that Sahih Bukhari was transmitted through Hamad bin Shakir remains historically unproven. The fourth chain of transmission through which Sahih Bukhari is said to have reached Ibn Hajar was through Bazdawi. According to Ibn Makula, Bazdawi was the last person to transmit directly from Bukhari himself, and he died in 329. However, this claim faces a critical historical issue. Ibn Makula wasn't born until 422, a full 93 years after Bazdawi's death. This significant time gap means Ibn Makula had no way to verify Bazdawi's reliability through direct evidence or contemporary sources, making Bazdawi's role in this chain of transmission historically unverifiable. Therefore, Bazdawi is an unknown narrator whose authentication by Ibn Makula and those after him is invalid and unreliable. Further evidence of this chain's weakness comes from Ibn Nuqta's account. He cites Al-Mustaghfiri's History of Nasaf, which acknowledges that people considered Bazdawi's narrations weak because he was very young when he heard them. Additionally, people only received confirmation of Bazdawi's hearing of Sahih Bukhari through a letter from Ja'far bin Muhammad. This Ja'far bin Muhammad is identified by Al-Sam'ani as Abu al-Fadl. Ja'far bin Muhammad bin Abbas Tubani, but there is no historical record of his credentials or circumstances. The lack of information about this key figure who supposedly verified Bazdawi's transmission further undermines the authenticity of this chain, as we cannot verify the reliability of the person who authenticated Bazdawi's hearing of the text. Based on this investigation, the chain of Sahih Bukhari's transmission through Bazdawi proves to be weak and historically unsupported. The evidence suggests that Bazdawi's name was likely added later to the chains of narration of Sahih Bukhari, as there is no concrete historical evidence of Sahih Bukhari's transmission through his chain. This finding not only challenges the authenticity of this particular chain of narration, but also indicates a possible fabrication in the historical record of Sahih Bukhari's transmission. The transmission of Sahih Bukhari through Abu Abdullah al-Hussein bin Ismail al-Mahamili's first chain presents significant historical concerns. According to Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, al-Dhahabi documented just one hadith through Abdul Wahid bin Muhammad bin Mahdi. Though Abdul Wahid received authentication from Khatib al-Baghdadi in Tarikh Baghdad, this verification itself raises serious questions. Khatib al-Baghdadi's methodology for declaring narrators trustworthy was notably broad, such as he would authenticate anyone who directly narrated to him or lived during his time, even without direct contact, or existed up to 2 centuries before him. Such a sweeping approach to verification undermines the reliability of his authentication, particularly in establishing the authenticity of crucial chains of transmission like this one. This overly broad approach to authentication, combined with the existence of only a single hadith through this chain, severely undermines its credibility as a reliable path of transmission for the complete Sahih Bukhari. The second chain of transmission, as documented in Al-Kawakib al-Darari, was reported by Shams al-Din al-Kirmani, but contains 3 significant weaknesses in its narrators. The chain includes Abu al-Khattab Nazr bin Ahmad bin al-Batar and Rukn al-Din Abdul Rahman bin Abi Harmi, both of whom are unknown figures in historical records. The third narrator, Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Ubaidullah al-Mu'addib, was only authenticated by Khatib al-Baghdadi, whose verification methods have already been established as unreliable. The presence of these 3 problematic narrators in a single chain makes it historically untenable as a reliable path of transmission. Ibn Hajar reveals a crucial piece of evidence in Lisan al-Mizan about this chain's authenticity. He quotes Abu Ja'far bin Zubair, who found a suspicious letter from Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Balanzi. In this letter, al-Balanzi claimed to have received the complete Sahih Bukhari through a specific chain of narrators, Silafi from Ibn al-Batar, from Ibn al-Bayy, from al-Mahamili, from Bukhari. However, there was a major flaw in this claim. Silafi, one of the key narrators in this chain, only possessed a single hadith from this chain, not the complete Sahih Bukhari. Ibn Hajar notes that later scholars were misled by this false claim and incorrectly treated this chain as authentic. This discovery effectively invalidates Al-Kirmani's assertion about the chain's reliability, as it proves the impossibility of transmitting the complete work through a narrator who only had access to one hadith. It's like someone claiming they received a complete book through a person who only knew one page of it. This revelation proves the entire chain of transmission was fabricated. The transmission of Sahih al-Bukhari through al-Mahamili is historically unreliable. The first chain relies on Abdul Wahid bin Mahdi, authenticated by Khatib al-Baghdadi, whose broad verification methods undermine credibility. The second chain includes unknown narrators and a critical flaw exposed by Ibn Hajar. Silafi, a key transmitter, possessed only a single hadith, not the full book. This proves the chain was falsely treated as authentic, making both routes unreliable for transmitting Sahih al-Bukhari. 5 chains of transmission, 500 years of history, and not a single unbroken link to connect the dots. What we call Sahih Bukhari today might be more accurately described as Ibn Hajar's collection of what he thought Bukhari said, a reality that challenges centuries of accepted wisdom about the most trusted book after the Quran. The path we traced from Imam Bukhari to Ibn Hajar reveals a startling reality. The most celebrated book in Islamic history after the Quran stands on chains of transmission that crumble under their own weight. Like a house of cards built on shifting sands, each chain, Firabri, Makil, Shakir, Bazdawi, and Mahamili, falls short of the very standards Muslim scholars themselves established for authenticating hadith. In the end, we're left with an uncomfortable question. If we can't verify how this book reached us, how can we be certain about what's inside it?